Well, good morning. Yes, it was a good start to the day. Yes, thank you so much. We're excited. I'm excited about being here. We're in week 3 of this series, The Grave Robber. And what we've been doing is we've been looking at the signs or the miracles of Jesus that are recorded in the book of John. And it's going to lead us up to Easter, which is it's just a week away. This is traditionally like Palm Sunday, Palm Sunday, and everybody waves to everybody when they come in, and Jesus enters in Jerusalem. But we kind of been following this grave robber and looking at some of the things. And I think over the past couple of weeks, we're starting to see the theme that, like John has a theme that runs through this whole gospel, and I think we're starting to see this theme begin to be lived out in what we've seen in the lives of the disciples and some of the miracles that they've been a part of. And that theme is this: that don't seek miracles. John tells us, don't seek miracles, but follow Jesus. Don't spend so much time looking for, I need to see a miracle. No, don't seek those, but follow Jesus. And the more the disciples have followed Jesus, the more time they've spent with Jesus, the more he's been teaching them and revealing to them who he is. At the same time that we would follow along, he's revealing to us who he is to us in our lives today. And each sign that John has recorded in his gospel, that he's included in his gospel, he's put there for a specific reason. And each week we've looked at this reason. It's right at the end of his book. I mean, in the book of John, it's just 21 chapters. So in chapter 20, he tells us the reason for the signs. And he says this in verse 30. It says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written." I've told you about the water turning into wine, and then he shares with them about he's healing a man's dying son, and the son wasn't even there. And then we mentioned how he had healed a man who had been at the pool of Bethesda, had been crippled for 38 years his entire life, and Jesus healed him. And then last week we talked about Jesus feeding the 5,000 men and the families and all the single ladies and the single guys that were there, how he somewhere around 20,000 people. And I put these in here. I've told you about these signs so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, that Jesus is the Messiah, that Jesus is the Son of God, and that by believing that, you may have life in his name. You have his eternal life. Last week we talked about the feeding of the 5,000 men and their families, or the feeding of 20,000 people, and what Jesus was teaching his disciples, and what Jesus was revealing to his disciples if you place in my hands what you have, no matter how big you think it is or how small, insignificant, if you place it in my hands, all your time and your talent and your treasure, I'll do more than you ever could imagine. And when we place these things in our life in God's hands, he'll do more than we could ever imagine in our lives. So today what I want to do is I want to look at the next sign that takes place immediately after Jesus feeds all these people and then collected the 12 baskets. Then the next sign happens, and it's Jesus walking on the water. And if you grew up in church or in Sunday school or heard preachers preach about it, you've probably heard this enough that if I could invite you up on the stage, you could probably tell us about Jesus walking on the water, because this is one of those familiar miracles that people share about and talk about. But what I want to look at today is, what did John see in Jesus then on the water, and how does that matter to us now? What difference does it make in our lives now, today? So we're still in John chapter 6. This is immediately after he's fed the 20,000 people, as we discussed last week. It's in verse 14. I'm going to actually go back and pick up the very end of last week and carry it on into today. In verse 14 it says, "When the people saw the sign that he had done, when they realized that they had all been fed from 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, when they saw this, they said, 'This is indeed the prophet who is coming to the world.'" This is the one we've been told about all our lives, going to church, going to the synagogue, and hearing the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all the rabbis teach us as we grow. This is the Messiah. This is, in Joseph's mind, we talk about Christmas, this is our warrior king. This is the one that we've been waiting on. And perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force and make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. Jesus withdraws from their plans to go be with his Father, to go spend time with his Father, and go and pray to his Father so he can focus on his plans. See what happened there? Their plans were to make him king. We'll force him. We'll make him king. He says, no. I got other plans. It's not, my hour is not yet come. That goes back in the very first part of John. He's focusing on his plans. And then it continues and says, then when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into a boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. They'd been in Tiberias, which is on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. Now they're going to be sailing to the west. Well, not sailing, but they're going to be rowing to the west to Capernaum, go back where they came from. They're getting ready to go there. And it was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. So when I'm reading this, my very first question is, wait. Are they leaving without Jesus? I mean, why are they leaving without Jesus? Maybe that's the way you think. Why would they leave without Jesus? This is their rabbi. But what they're doing is they're just being obedient. If you read this account in Matthew and in Mark, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat. They wanted to stay. They wanted to stay by all that was going on and all the commotion that was going on. He made them get into the boat. And while he said, y'all get in the boat and take off. And I'm going to disperse the crowd. I'm going to send these people home because they're off base and what I'm supposed to do. I'm going to send them home and I'm going to go up to the mountains and refocus on my daddy's plan for my life. But you got to give them credit. The disciples waited on him. They know that he's going to disperse the crowd. They know he's going to come back any minute. So they sit there and they wait. Not on the shore. They've actually cast out a little bit away from the people. They're out in the water, and they're waiting for him to come back, and he doesn't come back, so it's dark now. We got to go. He told us to go. We got to go. And that way, somebody tells you got to do something. Even if they're not there with you, you got to be obedient to what they said. If mom and daddy said clean the house, and they go out and go shopping or something, and you're like, well, they're not here. No, they told you want to be obedient, so you clean the house. Because even when you don't wait for them to get back, you go ahead and clean the house. Well, they said, all right, well, let's just go ahead and go. So they take off. Have you ever wondered, did Jesus know that a storm was coming? When I think about it, I think he did. I mean, he knew a storm was coming. This is Jesus. It's the Son of God. He knows what's coming. So now, if you get in that mindset and you think, well, if Jesus knew the storm was coming, then why in the world did he deliberately send his friends into danger? Why did he do that? The truth is, he was actually rescuing them from a greater danger. Stranger danger. Stranger. He was rescuing them from something greater than a storm. He was keeping them from being sucked into this fanatical crowd that was going to force Jesus to be their warrior king. And that Jesus would lead this mob of 20,000 people and the disciples to defeat Rome. They would destroy Rome. And if they destroyed Rome, then Jesus and his followers would be the government. And then Judas would be the treasurer. And Peter would be the prime minister. And when all this starts to happen, then pride starts to sink in. Because the disciples had just seen Jesus feed 20,000 people. They just had what they call a mountaintop experience. And Jesus is sending them into a valley now. You'll understand more about that here. But see, the feeding the 20,000, that was Jesus' lesson. He was teaching the disciples who he was. He was expressing and revealing to the disciples who he was. The storm will be the test to reveal what the disciples really believe and what they learned from Jesus in these past several weeks, several months. So they get in the boat and they head off. Out of obedience, they head off to Capernaum. And the scripture says that the sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. I learned a lot of stuff about the Sea of Galilee this week when I was studying and getting ready for this. Actually, I was reading about it a couple of weeks ago, but it all became a little more evident that the Sea of Galilee was actually considered a beautiful freshwater lake. Well, a big lake, but a beautiful freshwater lake. It was averaged about 7 to 8 miles across from one side to the other, east to west, and from north to south, it was about 13 miles long. Big. But it actually set 700 feet below sea level. It is surrounded by mountains that reached peaks of 1,400 feet above sea level. So that when storms or winds would come across the mountain, they would come down into this valley where the sea is, and all it would wreak havoc on the Sea of Galilee. There'd be strong winds coming out of the west, and they'd be these white caps. They actually have records that there were 5 to 10 feet waves in some of these storms. There's history recorded where some of the towns along the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee were damaged by floodwaters 10 feet high from the Sea of Galilee because of storms. Can you imagine waves 10 feet high down here at Tamarack at the bridge? Hitting the bridge and going across? This is a lake. This is a lake. The Sea of Galilee is a lake. And I also learned this about when I was reading about the Sea of Galilee. The Jews were not sailors. They were desert nomads. Their entire ancestry, all of their history is in the desert. They know how to survive in the desert. They are not at home on the sea. This is not stable places for them. And because you can read about the fishermen and the disciples being fishermen, and they only went to the shallow water. They never took their boats way out. Remember, when you think about this, reading the Gospels, Jesus talked to them. So they're just off there. They're out there where people noodle for catfish. They're just out past there. They don't go out because way out there, it's like 200 feet deep. This is like the bad place of bathing lake. It was down at Trestles. It's like 100 feet. This is like 200. They don't go out there. They're afraid of the water. They're not at home on the water. And they also noticed it in the scriptures when they were being taught. Every time they made a reference to the sea in their scriptures, in their teaching, it had something bad to do with it. There was something evil about this. And they even thought that nothing comes good out of the sea. And we get these fish along the shoreline, but nothing good comes out of the sea because they're remembering in Noah's day, there was this great flood. And this flood came from the rains and the seas and the water from underneath. And this was God's judgment when it comes to the sea. God uses the sea for judgment. And then there's Jonah. Jonah tried to run away from God, and they threw him off the boat in the sea, and he got swallowed up by a fish and carried to the bottom of the sea. This is it. And then you read the book of Job, there's this creature, and his name is Leviathan. You know where Leviathan lives? In the sea. He's this monster beast, the dark death monster, and he lives in the sea, and it's recorded in the Bible. Daniel, when he does all his prophecies, he tells about these terrible, great beasts that come out of the sea. When people were thinking about the Sea of Galilee and thinking about any seas, all they saw was evil. That it was a home for evil creatures, and it was a home for demons, and only God could control them. They had no control. This was not their home. This was not a safe place. When you go into the New Testament, Jesus cast out demons from a man. He has like a legion of demons in him, and he sends them into a herd of pigs. And where did the pigs go? They run off a cliff into the sea. They even said, throw us into those pigs so we can go back home. That's where the evil is in the sea. And in the Revelation chapter 13, the Antichrist and the beast with the Antichrist, where does he come from? Out of the sea. So you got the very John that wrote about this Revelation is the same John that just wrote this gospel. So he's trying to tell us, you need to get into the minds and the thoughts of these disciples in this boat, and the Jews and the Israelites, because there's more to the Sea of Galilee than just this beautiful freshwater lake. This is a terrible place to be, out in the middle of it. This is not safe out here. Not in a storm. Not at night in a storm. So now you got to get yourself in the mindset of the disciples on this little boat that's just 5.5 feet wide and about 12 or 13 feet long, and there's 12 people, and there's 5 on one side, 6 on the other, and they're just rolling, and it storms, and it says that, and all this, the waves and stuff, because they're heading west, and the storms come out of the west, so they're going into the wind, and they're going into the waves, some 5 foot, some 10 foot waves, and they're just rolling with their little oars. There's no sails, there's no trolling motor, there's no mercury or nothing in there. They're just whoosh, whoosh. You just think about you're out there. It's this terrible place to be. Then it says that when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles. If you go kayaking, 3 or 4 miles is a long way. Think about this. They've been rowing for 8 hours, and they've only gone 3 or 4 miles. What do you mean 8 hours? Well, it was dark when they left, so we're going to say 7 o'clock. They started rolling at 7 o'clock. This is taking place at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's 8 hours. And they've only gone halfway across the lake. But as they've gone halfway across the lake, they're now in the middle of the sea. And it's dark. There's wind, waves, storm. They can't even see the shoreline. Right now, they're in the middle of their fear. Right in the middle of it. they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but this boat with the disciples are halfway across the lake. They're somewhere between 3 or 4 miles away from the shore. And Jesus has walked to them. The average walking speed of a human being is 3 to 4 miles in an hour. 3 or 4 miles an hour. So Jesus had been walking for about an hour on the water. Not just he's there. No, he's been walking from the mountain to the shore across the water for an hour in a storm with waves all around him, and he's just walking. And he makes it all the way to the boat. And they were frightened. I think John is just trying to be manly here. We were frightened. We saw something on the water. We were taken aback. If you read this account in Matthew, if you go, it's the same account. He's talking about the wind and the storm and the Sea of Galilee. Matthew tells it like this. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. That's not frightened. That's frightened. Terrified is, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. I don't know how you read the Bible, but when I read the Bible, read this part, I see 12 men in a small boat, and in the middle of the storm, and they're screaming like little girls. It's a ghost! We're gonna die out here! Nothing good comes out of the sea. And I see them trying to position themselves behind one another to protect one another from this evil. Whatever this evil is, they're trying to protect them. Did you see that? That's what I see in my mind. We were terrified. No, they were scared senseless. They're screaming out there. But in verse 20, but Jesus said to them, it is I. Do not be afraid. Jesus says, don't be afraid. He knows that they're scared, so they weren't just frightened. He sees them running around the boat, screaming, trying to get behind one another, and push somebody off as a sacrifice. You don't know what they were thinking, but Jesus says, don't be afraid. But he also says something else there that we miss in the English translation. We just read right by it. Jesus uses a phrase here to announce who he was to the disciples. It's the same phrase that John uses 7 times in his book in reverence to who Jesus is. It's the same phrase that Moses heard from the burning bush when God told him to go to Egypt and rescue Israel out of slavery. When Moses says, who do I say? Who do I tell people that sent me here? Who do I tell? And God said in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, God said to Moses, I am who I am. It is I. Whoa. Yeah. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. This is what you're supposed to say to the disciples. This is what you say to those who believe in you. I am has sent me to you. So put yourself on the boat with the disciples now. You're scared because this is not your home out here on the water. You're a desert dweller. You're a landlubber. You can't swim, and there are no life jackets. They haven't even invented yet. And this water is 5-foot waves, 10-foot waves. The boat's going up. You're starting to swamp the boat, and you're trying to bail out all the water too. And you're scared now. It's just getting worse. And then you see Jesus. You see something walking on the water, and then he announces. When he's there at the boat, he announces. He reveals who he is. I am. Don't be afraid. You mean this rabbi that we've been walking with, this rabbi that we've been learning from, this rabbi that's been teaching us, this rabbi that we've been eating with, that we've been spending time with, is actually God himself? See, I believe at that moment right there, I think a different fear came over the disciples. Yes, they're scared of the sea. Yes, they're scared of drowning and dying because nothing comes good. But now, I am. Isaiah described it this way when he found himself before the throne of God. When Isaiah found himself in the presence of God, he recorded this in Isaiah 6:5. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined. For I am a man of unclean lips. I am a sinner in God's presence. And I live among a people of unclean lips. I come from a sinful culture. I live in a sinful world. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. This fear that comes over Isaiah, this fear that comes over the disciples, and the fear that would come over us if we were in that boat with the disciples and Jesus comes walking on the water is a reverent fear. It's a holy fear. It's a breathtaking fear. It's a self-examining, glorious fear that washes over them at this one time. So we have to understand, in God's presence, not only do we recognize who He is, but who we are. Who we are in His presence. I mean, just think, notice what happens to the disciples when they recognize Jesus for who He is. When they recognize Jesus for who He is. Then they were glad to take Him into the boat. But before that, they were trying to hide from Him. They were screaming like little girls. Now they're glad to take Him into the boat because now Jesus is in the boat. Jesus is in the boat. There's no more storm to be afraid of. There's no more storm to be scared of, to be frightened by. There's only one thing on their mind. Jesus is in the boat. God, Jesus, God is in the boat. And when you look at this account in Matthew, it says that they worshipped Him. At that moment, they worshipped Him. They said, truly, you are the Son of God. Truly, you are the Son of God. See, if you go back into John, in chapter 20, he says, all these signs have been written in my book so that you will believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And they believe. They recognize who He is. And then it continues, says, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Now I know how that reads. Some people get in their mind, oh yeah, just bam, just like that. It was magical. It was mystical. They went from halfway across the lake to right there. And I know how people teach it. But that's what happened. When Jesus showed up, they're right on the shore. I want us to, if you would, just bear with me. I want to look at this word immediately just a little differently. You know how you can be driving down the road in your car or your truck and you're heading somewhere. You have a destination in mind that you've got to get to. And you're riding the road, you turn on your radio and a song comes on. A very familiar song, like the greatest song ever. And you start singing along and it takes you back in time. You know, it takes you back to another place. And you're singing because you know every word of the song. You know how it gets big and you just get sucked into the song. Or maybe it's a worship song and you just start worshiping God there in your car. You just start worshiping outrageously. You know, unhindered and unashamed. You're just screaming in the song and singing like, yeah. You're driving sometimes with your eyes closed and you're raising your hands and it's just thought, did I just miss my exit? See, a lot of us have done that. See, this is what I think happened in the boat. They're 3 miles away from the shore, and Jesus comes into the boat. And I think they're celebrating and they're worshiping and they're rolling now because the waves are gone. The storm's gone. And they're just like, man, why didn't I recognize Him? Why didn't I recognize who He was when He turned the water into wine? Nobody can do that. And they're talking to each other and they're reliving all this. You know, when that man would come to him back, his son is dying and he's just like miles away and he can't get there, but He heals him. Why didn't I recognize that? Why didn't I recognize when he took that man and been on a mat and lay on a mat for 38 years and He helped him up and he walked away? Why didn't that sink in? And all those people, we were there when He fed all those people, and now he just come walking on the water and He says, I am. Boom! They hit the shore. They arrived at where Jesus had sent them to in the first place. Sometimes we don't know if we'll ever get to where Jesus wants us to be. And He lays it on our heart. This is what I want you to be. This is what I've called you to be. This is how I want you to live your life. I don't know. There's so many storms. There's so much wave and so many wind blowing, so much wind. I just don't know if I'll ever get there. But if we could just intently, if we could just focus our life intently on Jesus and who He is, that He's living in us, that God's Spirit is alive in us, And it causes us to worship Him in spirit and in truth. We'll lose track of time. We'll forget about the storm. We'll disregard the struggles. Situations, problems. Because Jesus is God. When we're focused on God, everything else goes away. See, I've listened to this lesson, and I've studied this lesson, and I've taught this lesson, and I've shared about this lesson, and I think there's three things in here that'll help us believe that Jesus is who He says He is in our life. The first one is this. If you follow Jesus, there will be storms. I think sometimes as a church, in the past history of the church, in our eagerness as individuals and as a church body to evangelize the world and to share the gospel, that sometimes we have given the impression that once you start to follow Jesus, and there'll be no more trouble and no more storms in your life. And that's not true. You know it and I know it. The truth is, these storms may intensify. When we're obedient to God and we head out across the Sea of Galilee, there's going to be 10-foot waves that we've never experienced before. Once we decide to follow Jesus, storms will come, conflicts will come, struggles will come. Satan can't stand it. He doesn't want us to get to the other side where Jesus wants to send us. So the storms will come. But this we know. When we follow Jesus, we have the love and compassion of the only one who can walk on water and get to us and silence the storm. And get this too, Jesus never denies the reality of the storm. He never says, what are y'all so afraid of? This is not a storm. I went to school at Appalachian, and this isn't rain, this isn't cold, this isn't snow. What are you talking? No, Jesus never did that. Even though the storms will come in our lives out of nowhere, just like on the Sea of Galilee, one day everything's great, and out of nowhere, a storm, a massive storm hits us. Jesus is never caught by surprise. Not once has Jesus ever been caught by surprise with anything that we encounter. It might catch us by surprise, but Jesus is not surprised. If you read about this account, again, like I said, if you go to Matthew and Mark and read about this account, when Jesus goes up to the mountain and prays to His Father in heaven, He looks out on the Sea of Galilee and He sees His disciples struggling in the storm. So that tells you that Jesus could see 3.5, 4 miles from His vantage point in the dark. The human eye can see 3.1 miles to the horizon, and that's it. We can't see beyond that, but Jesus can see beyond that. He sees what we can't see. And He's up there, He's watching His disciples struggling in the storm. He knows where they are. He knows what they're going through. And He goes down off the mountain and walks across the water for an hour to get to them. He sees the struggle and He comes to them. He sees our struggles and He comes to us because He's God. He came to our struggles before they even happened. I know that's kind of hard to rationalize, but He came to our storms before they ever showed up by dying on a cross to rescue us from the storms of sin. He came from heaven. He could see what was going to happen in our lives before we were even conceived. And God's plan was to send Him to rescue us from our storm. He died on a cross to rescue us. And 3 days later, next Sunday, we celebrate His resurrection because of His love for us and welcome Him into our boat, into our life, into the middle of our storms. One other thing. Storms will test your faith. Storms will come. Jesus doesn't deny that. It will test your faith. Find out what you really believe. Honestly, it could be the storms in our life that cause us or bring us to the point of what we truly believe. We can go through the motions and we can act like it, but it's a storm that's going to tell us what we really believe. Get us to see and recognize who Jesus is, that He is the Son of God, that He is the Lord of Lords, that He is the King of Kings, that He is the Master of the storm. It's a test. These valleys, the storm, it's a test. What do we believe? If we want to pass that test, if we want to grow in our faith and believe in who Jesus truly is as the Son of God, then when the storms of life start coming and the waves start pouring into your boat and you start to sink, you start to sink into these depths of despair and sorrow and fear, remember this. Jesus walks on water. He walks on water. I mean, I've seen this in my life, and I've seen this in my life. Why didn't I recognize that God was doing this? Because there's miracles in our life every day, all around us. We just don't see them. He walks on water. I mean, if you ever feel abandoned and forgotten by your friends and your family, you feel like you're out there all by yourself, especially in the midst of a storm of depression and anxiety and doubt, Jesus walks on water. That should wipe all that away. I mean, the wind and the waves, they just keep, Ronnie don't understand, they just keep coming. I don't know if they're ever going to stop. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to get to where I'm supposed to get to because of all this storm. And it's starting to drag me down, and I'm starting to feel, I'm in this darkness, and I'm in this pain that's covering my whole, I'm overwhelmed, I'm drowning in it. Jesus walks on water. Does that not mean anything? He walks on water to you. So when our faith falters, and it will, and we fail, we start to fear, we start to give up, Jesus walks on water. To us. He came to us in the middle of our storm. So let me ask you right now, what's your biggest fear? What's the biggest fear in your life right now? What's starting to swallow you up? What's starting to cover you up and put you in a place you don't want to be? That you're not at home there. This is uncomfortable. There's fear. I could die here. There's no hope. We are not alone. I am is here. Do not fear. Let's pray. God, there's many times we read things in the Bible and we just read right in there and say, that was an interesting story. And this is kind of one of those stories, God. This is something I've heard as a child. I heard it in Sunday school. I heard it in RAs. I heard it in vacation Bible school. I've heard preachers. I've heard evangelists tell this story. And the crazy thing is, God, every time I've heard this story, they talk about Peter. But this one, John wrote this one for a purpose. So that we would see who Jesus is. Not what Peter did, what Jesus did. Because He is truly the Son of God. And He comes into our storms. No matter what we're dealing with, I don't know what you're dealing with. I have enough storms in my life. Some people look and say they're not big, but you're not in my life, so you don't know. And I might see some years and hear some years and say, well, how's that a storm? I don't know your life. You could be drowning. Even as a believer, do you realize that this sign right here, this miracle right here, was only for the disciples? It's in the dark, so nobody else could see it. They were 4 miles away from anybody. This miracle of Jesus' presence was only for His disciples. It's only for His children. To tell us who He is, so that we can tell others. And if you're in here this morning as a believer, a follower of Jesus, if you've had doubts, you've had fear, you've had confusion sometimes whether Jesus is actually paying attention, He's been watching every step of the way. Nothing has surprised Him. He'll come here, He'll be right. He's right there. I am right there. in the middle of your fear, in the middle of your storm, in the middle of your depression, in the middle of your doubt, in the middle of your hurt, in the middle of your pain, in the middle of your unknowing what's next. I just let him in the boat. You'll be so surprised in no time at all. You will be where he wants you to be. Safe. If you don't have that relationship with Jesus and he'd come walk into the water, you would, up to you on the water, you would scream. But it comes out of love. It comes out of compassion. He loves you so much, he died for you. So that he can walk with you and travel with you through every storm that you're going to face for the rest of your life. Today, God, we welcome you into our life. We welcome you into our boat. You can make that decision today to be a follower of Jesus Christ and be comforted and loved by the one, the only one, capable of walking on water and silencing the storms in your life. And we praise him. As we praise you, God, for what you've done for us, as we prepare for a week of waiting for Sunday to arrive, God, we thank you for all you've done for us and how you revealed yourself to us through your Son, Jesus Christ. And we praise you and we thank you. It's all in his precious name. Amen.